Well, that was an amazing night 3. We had 2 group dates, a one-on-one, and I am wearing blue for Team Blue. What did you think of the night? Let's talk about Joan getting vulnerable. Welcome to Reality TV Therapy with me, Dr. Diane. Welcome back to my channel. Make sure that you subscribe. Someone asked me, what does actually subscription mean? It really doesn't mean that much. It means you hit the subscribe button and it will notify you up in there where there's like a bell that I have posted a new episode. It doesn't mean anything with regards to YouTube. It just means you are a subscriber to my channel, but it helps the algorithm. So I greatly appreciate it if you like this content to make sure to subscribe. I also want to mention my other YouTube channel called Reframing Midlife. I need you to go over there and subscribe also. I just posted a video today on what we call gray divorce. What is gray divorce? You may not know what it is. It means you have gray hair, you're midlife, and you're going through a divorce. I interviewed 3 of my friends. I'm calling it the good, the bad, and the ugly, talking about divorce, pros and cons, because that is a running theme on the Golden Bachelorette as well. So again, if you like this content, you'll like that content too. It's a longer video this last time, but check it out and please leave me a comment there and subscribe. Okay, thank you for the housekeeping. Let's get to it. Joan, this is night 3. It starts out with Pascal. Pascal, the controversy is he says he doesn't like to cook, clean, etc. And his daughter actually confirmed that her dad is a bit of a diva. Now we know it's all entertainment and that's all hyped up. But one has to say, okay, Pascal, if you don't do those things, do you have the money to pay for someone like a chef, a housekeeper? Maybe. But what does Pascal bring? He brings the fun, let's face it. And he's actually perfect for this one-on-one date in Vegas. They drive in the Porsche. I love it that the men come out and they're just so excited, and Pascal is excited. He has to relinquish control because Joan is going to drive, but they're on a private jet. And I'm like, woo, producers, spending your budget on that. We haven't seen a private jet before, as I can remember. They're in a limo. They're at the Paris Hotel, just so appropriate. As Pascal is speaking French, it's very très chic, we shall say. They're eating and they're shopping. I just loved this date. This is what we would call the pretty woman date. And he says he's Julia Roberts, and I just have to laugh because who else would be more perfect for this date? The outfits, the Sonny and Cher, and Joan, by the way, looks gorgeous in everything. But so does Pascal. When he comes out and he like opens his jacket and we see his kind of ripped body, that's not a dad bod. That's pretty impressive. He looks great and he's 69 years old. Good for Pascal. I did love those final outfits that they chose. Joan looks gorgeous in everything that she wears. Really sexy. He looks great too. Wayne Newton comes in for this date. Wayne Newton with the smile that looks like electric. Yeah, he's probably had a lot of work done on his face, but he is in Hollywood and he is just the quintessential person for this date. So I really love how perfect this Vegas date was. I'm guessing Wayne Newton probably still does a show in Vegas. I don't know for sure, but he has been around for a long time. And I just love everything about it. There's this passionate kiss when they're up on the Ferris wheel that goes over, and I thought it was really quite perfect. And of course, he gets the rose. Okay, now what's going on at the same time is this storyline with Charles and Gerry. They're shopping, right? They're shopping because the men are all snoring and the poor guys just can't get a break, right? Those beds, those twin beds are tiny. It reminded me in the Golden Bachelor where the women, Natasha in particular, had like the chair earrings. She said they needed chairs for the rose ceremony. The men need beds. I don't know if they need to mix it up. I kept thinking they need to put them in a hotel that's more comfortable. I really think if we did a Golden Paradise, they should put them on a cruise ship and give them all their own rooms. Give them some luxuries that they're used to, because it's got to be rough. But how adorable are Charles and Gerry buying the melatonin and the masks and the Snuggies, and then bringing them back for the guys. It's so endearing. I could watch an entire HGTV show on just these two men shopping. Well, I could watch Charles doing just about anything. So that is so sweet. Let me go back to Pascal then, because we're flip-flopping storylines. And then Pascal, in the evening portion of the date, really does give us more information about himself. That story about having shoes that had a hole in them and his dad putting cardboard in it, really touching. And I think Joan is not falling for him as much as she's impressed with the story, because when someone shares that story, that is a lot. Now let's get to the group date, and this is like the only sports shirt I had in blue that I could find. The kickball date. I love this because we don't need to see these men playing flag football. We don't need to see these men being injured. And the fact that they're stretching out beforehand, doing the kicking, and they're still, pulling their hamstrings, pulling a hip, but they're going for it. Do you love it? It was Greg who slid into third base. I'm like, you go. These men with their cutoff shirts, they're looking great. And they're out in the sun. They're having a great time. And this is where Jesse Palmer shines, right? He is a newscaster. He just is in his element whenever he is, moderating one of these group sports dates. I just love to see this. What I also loved was Mark. Mark is going up to Gil and hugging him. He's going to Gerry and he's hugging him. There were probably others. And even Jesse said Mark's giving out more hugs than anyone. And it kind of felt like little kids playing t-ball, and they don't know where they're running, but they hug each other. And I just thought this was so endearing, back to the lack of competition, not seeing it as a game, but really as an opportunity to bond with one another. That is just what is so refreshing, continues this theme of the men really bonding. Then Charles not knowing how to kick the ball. He's probably not like super athletic. And then of course the whole Quaker marketing opportunity, him eating his Quaker oats. All of it well done. Then it's the evening portion, and we were told that Gil was going to be edited out, but he gets the group date rose, so I guess they couldn't edit that out. They probably could have, but he gets the group date rose. Maybe they kind of squashed that a little bit, not as much airtime. There you have it. Okay, the massage. After all of this, I'm sure it was the producers. They make it seem like it's Joan, but so well deserved. These guys are all beat up, have aches and pains. I love this for them. It was just great. In the meantime, the storyline is with Jonathan, who gets the one-on-one. So different from what we've seen before. Usually, yay, I get the one-on-one, but he's nervous. And part of this, I start saying, why? Okay? I think it's sweet because he knows the stakes are high, but once we get to know Jonathan's story, you can kind of see that. And remember, just in the last prom date, Jonathan was a little bit awkward about, yes, never going to prom, but like he was dancing one minute really confident and the next not. So I'm really not sure what to read about Jonathan. Like there's something that to me, he doesn't feel entirely like comfortable in his own body. There's just some insecurity there, and I wanted to know what you thought. That's just my read. And they could be maximizing this and kind of playing off of his insecurities and him crying a little bit about it. But it is true that the stakes are high on a group, on a one-on-one date, and Jonathan knows that. Now, I felt like the date itself was just a little weak. Horseback riding, there was no evening portion of the date. I kind of felt like Jonathan got a little gypped, or they had a few hours and they just snuck this in and said, okay, we're going to throw Jonathan in because we blew our budget on the Vegas date and we just don't have more. And that's just in the hills that they are. They didn't go too far. But this story was a little hard for me to digest. When Jonathan's talking to Joan on the quintessential bench, which is kind of like the hot tub that they move from place to place, and they're sitting and they're talking that one Sunday morning, his ex came to him, took a deep breath, and said, Jonathan, I want to get a divorce. That to me is a little bit unusual. Like, no forewarning, no understanding what's going on. Was Jonathan the red flag? Was she the red flag? Something about this story just doesn't come together for me. Now, Joan, in her quintessential refined way, handles it really well because he's feeling like he's too much. She reassures him, no, you're not too much. I don't see a huge romantic connection here. I think it's healing to get those messages from somebody that you're dating. But I do also think that Jonathan, along with some of the other men, as I mentioned last week, can be really intimidated by this. She has had the love of her life. She's lost him in death, which is different than a divorce. And why I want to get to what I call the difference between even a cornerstone versus a capstone relationship. But let me continue with that story. So that's Jonathan. In the meantime, while they're on their date, the only real drama for this episode is the men and Kim's song. So here we've got Captain Kim, who says, gentlemen, I have written this song. We have some downtime. This is for all of us. You know, we are the mansion men. And you could just see their faces drop. Like, no friggin' way am I going to sing that song. And they're trying to be diplomatic and trying to say, but this is your song, Kim. You know, he's an intense guy. Kim feels like he was in the Navy, right? He was in the Navy. He likes things a certain way. And we've seen little flares of disappointment with Kim. So I can see where the men are a little bit like, oh God, and if we all sort of join together. But what did you think of that much? Was the song cringe? I did think it was thoughtful. I thought the insistence felt a little bit much. So now we have the cocktail party and the rose ceremony. And this is what I call when Joan gets vulnerable. I really love this about Joan. She is all in. And we already know that they're snippets because she's telling Gerry and other of the men that her mom is sick. She's a little homesick. She misses her kids. And she comes in that night and says, wow, these men are bringing it. They're opening up. They're telling me more and more about their lives. I have to match them. In couples therapy, we call it leveling. If one person's being super emotional and sharing and the other isn't, it creates an imbalance. So we want to level that out. She comes in and talks about all her feelings, that she's the caregiver, that she's also exhausted because it's a lot. And in her relationship with John, I got the sense that she wasn't really caregiving for him as much as she was receiving, that he was very responsive, very reactive. She said nothing but really wonderful, positive things about her late husband. And of course, she's going to look for similar traits. Now let's talk about something else, the cornerstone versus capstone relationships. You may have never heard these terms, and I don't know who originally coined them, but I heard Esther Perel on a recent podcast talk about it. If you don't know who Esther Perel is, she's a couples therapist, very well renowned. She's written many books. But a cornerstone relationship is when you're young, typically, like in your 20s, 30s, just starting out, right? This is your foundational person. You meet, you have children together, you are sort of building your career and building all of that. So it's the cornerstone of your life. Are you looking for different traits for someone in a cornerstone relationship versus a capstone relationship? Capstone relationship is usually once you're fully formed, like you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and you're saying, I'm already who I am. I'm looking for someone to accept and appreciate me and for us to see together who we're going to be as a couple because I'm already formed. I'm already developed. And so is that a little bit different? I think it could be. Like you might be looking for the same traits in people. Let's say, her husband was athletic or kind or all these other things. She's going to look for something similar. But you're not having children with this person. So it's more like, do you accept me and my lifestyle? And that's when she said, I'm coming in here and you need to see all parts of me because this is what you're going to get. Okay, that's a capstone relationship. Probably not going to change as much meeting in your 60s. How the men respond to this is what I find so endearing. Charles L., who has my heart, he's saying, I will walk, side by side with you. If you're ahead of me, I'll be behind you. If you're behind me, I'll wait for you. Just so sweet. Now, the only thing that someone had commented on is that Charles, most of his stories are about him. And I hadn't really noticed that because they're pulling on our heartstrings. And, last episode we saw him sitting alone. And I can see him both ways. Sometimes the story is about him, like he pulls out the picture of him and his late wife. And I feel like that story can be a little negative. Earlier in the episode, he's talking to Guy, wanting to understand what happened to his late wife, and then he's relaying that story to Joan. And it does feel a little bit Charles-centric. He also talks about himself in the third person, which I find amazing. So he says, like the Charles in charge, like Charles, did you see Charles hit the ball and they didn't catch the ball? I'm like, interesting choices, Charles. So I'm just paying attention to that. I think he's sweet. He hasn't been on TV. So many of these things are just new for him. So he comes in with a level of kind of excitement and exuberance that I think is really contagious. But he does say to Joan, don't pressure yourself. Let your heart decide. All the men are echoing this. Thank you, Joan, for being vulnerable, because that allows the men to be more vulnerable. So that is the sentiment. And why vulnerability, I talk to my clients about this, is so important. Because if I'm asking you to be vulnerable and to bring it, and that's what I'm doing in my Reframing Midlife, being more vulnerable myself, then I have to mirror that. If I'm asking you to trust me, I have to trust you with my situation. Joan's talking about her mother being ill. Gerry writing a poem. Chalk, I also thought handled this really well. Now, Chalk, I know she really likes him. You can see that. She said Chalk reminds her of her late husband, John. That's very telling. You can see the connection. He's working really hard to make lots of connections. Oh, my mother is ill too, and we'll see where all of that goes. I really do like Chalk and Joan together. I think they have a lot of potential. At least I see the most romance between these two. Now, we have to talk about Gerry. Gerry. Okay, at first I will say, just him pulling up in the limo at the cocktail ceremony, I'm like, oh no, Gerry, you had your 15 minutes, we're done with you. But I will say this, her excitement when she saw him and their little connection together is really sweet. She's all alone. I've heard from so many of the leads that you're in there by yourself. You have no contact to anyone. So knowing anyone from the outside is really touching and endearing. Now, it seems appropriate that it would be Gerry because he was the first and only Golden Bachelor. That's how she got her chance on the show. Like if they brought in Trista, the original Bachelorette, who was in her 20s when she met her husband, I don't know, would that have fit as well? So I get it. I think Gerry was the perfect person, and she is excited. But I can't help but think when Gerry says, is it possible that your person's not here? Did they tell him to say that? It felt a little awkward. Or like, Gerry, are you reminiscent? Are you sorry that you didn't pick Joan? Joan left the show, but it was life-changing for Joan. And she says to Gerry, all of the men are being incredibly vulnerable. This is a more emotional journey than I could have imagined. Most people end up saying that. So the rose ceremony goes on. So many of the men are sharing their positive experiences. I think it was Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, who did say something like, I'm getting so much more out of this than I would have ever thought. And that's a sentiment that we're hearing, that this is healing the men and their lost wives and their divorces and talking and just hanging out, right? There's a lot of downtime that they're at the mansion together. And because they're not traveling to Europe in separate places, I can see that the bonding's really happening. That is what's working. So we go through all of the roses. None of them are that unexpected, but we do have to say goodbye to Kim, CK, and Greg. I really liked Greg. I thought he just needed more time with Joan, but lovely. All of the men saying what an amazing experience it's been. And then in the end, Kim singing with Guy his song. I thought that was really sweet. And then I thought, oh, I missed Jack. Jack would have been someone who would be singing with Kim because that's just what he did, right? Night one, whether it was cringy or not, these men are thoughtful. So can we learn anything by this Golden Bachelorette episode? You know, I always like to put my spin on that. Well, I think Joan is relaxing a little bit more into the experience and making it real too. Talking about her conflict between the outside world, her feelings towards her late husband, and you can see the layers. It's like in therapy, you know, the layers of an onion that get peeled off. We get to this, you know, softer kind of center, and you can see all of that unfolding pretty quickly, right? We're only in week 3. And then they're priming us with a preview. It looks like Chalk's going to leave. I don't think so. I think they're teasing us with that. I don't think he's going to leave. He might say to the men, I want to leave, or I'm anxious. And that would be pretty typical. Usually the person who gets the first one-on-one then has to watch her with other guys. Chalk might be a more traditional, kind of jealous sort of guy. So I could see that. But I think we're going to see more of Chalk. And I do think Guy is coming up. I see there's more with Jordan. I'd like to see a one-on-one with him. I don't know if we're going to get that. And there's just so much more to come. And then at some point, I heard they're filming for the Men Tell All. So I'm happy. I would just love to be in that room and see all these great men together. So stay tuned for next week where we have our next episode. But thanks for now. And that is a wrap.